One of the earliest characters to come out in Honkai style was a curious gamer girl named Bronya. No, not that Bronya. There we go. Despite being the third feature 5-star to come out, Silverwolf had a very unique playstyle with a multitude of mechanics that can aid in combat, in addition to being the first featured Nihility character in the game, which at the time was viewed as the most nebulous path on account of debuffing coming in many different forms. When she first was released, many players, myself included, were quick to notice a few aspects of her kit that appeared to give her the necessary means to stand the test of time. Evidenced by other gacha titles, characters released early on in a gacha's tenure tend to get overshadowed by later units in the long haul, usually as a result of them having a lower stat line, or in the case of most mainstream gachas, problems with hard coding. Now that we're in version 3, we're beginning to notice a significant portion of Starl's early cast struggling to keep up with the developing metagame due to the lack of synergistic elements brought on by hard coding their kits. Silverwolf's moveset though ostensibly seems to be more future-proof than much of the cast, at least that's what many of us thought. But all throughout version 2, she went from a stable presence in the endgame to one of the fastest declining units not just in usage data, but also player perception, with many believing she's not even deserving of a high-tier character placement. In light of her being featured in a rerun during phase 2 of version 3, I wanted to make a video discussing the downfall of Silverwolf, how she began to lose market share despite all impressions of her being more meta-resilient. One of the central combat mechanics drilled into our heads early on in the game was the weakness break system. Each enemy comes with a predetermined set of elements that, when struck by attacks of those varieties, additionally lower their toughness gauges. Even back then, weakness breaking was of utmost importance, as enemies would passively reduce the damage you dealt to them by 10%. Moreover, initiating a weakness break effectively caused the enemy target to lose their turn and suffer an accompanying debuff depending on the element of the attack triggering that weakness break in question. As far as most were concerned, that was about the full extent of weakness breaks throughout version 1 and early version 2. However, it was still a focal point of mastering HSR's combat, since proper usage and timing of weakness breaks not only increased your party's DPS against that enemy, but could also bypass critical boss attacks. With such a universal mechanic dictating the flow of combat, one would assume Silverwolf has a lot of staying power in the meta, a belief that was shared by the community at large. The main appeal of her repertoire is her ability to implant weakness types, and for roughly a full year, she was the only character capable of doing so. Even to this day, she's still the only unit who can do this dynamically. Her skill strikes an enemy to reduce their all-type resistance by 10% for 2 turns. Then she also implants a random weakness onto them based on the elemental composition of your party. If you have, say, Quantum, Lightning, and Wind, she applies one of those 3. This can result in mild inconsistency issues, but to be fair, the player has agency in raising the likelihood of getting the element you want. By fielding a party consisting of only 2 elements, the probability becomes 50-50, and of course, if you decide to run an entirely mono-quantum team, Silverwolf will guarantee a quantum weakness implant. It's also worth mentioning that the target also suffers a 20% reduction to their resistance towards that element. Why this matters is, if you look at any enemy, let's just say Kafka, you'll find that she's passively resistant to fire, ice, lightning, and quantum, the 4 elements that she's not vulnerable to. However, she takes neutral damage against physical, wind, and imaginary, giving you 2 incentives to fight enemies with the elements they're vulnerable to, since not only can you reduce their toughness gauge, but they also conversely just take less damage if you try to brute force them with a different element. Therein lies the advantage of Silverwolf that made her so appealing to us back in the day. She could theoretically implant any weakness type onto enemies and, at the same time, neutralize their innate resistance against it. This would allow you to, on paper, take on any boss or enemy regardless of what element you have. Considering they kept shoving it in front of our faces that weakness breaking was such a big deal, it's no surprise that a character who can practically remove the onus of needing to acquire a diverse array of party members would be viewed as a highly future-proof character. Bear in mind, this was only one part of her kit. Her skill alone was enough to capture attention, but she had so much more. Her talent would be next, having a chance to apply a random debuff to whomever she attacks, reducing their attack, defense, or speed. Unfortunately, there's no method to alleviate the inconsistency of her talent, but the main reason you did this was for the sake of her A6, wherein applying 3 or more debuffs to an enemy will further decrease their all-type res by 3%. Then, finally, aside from the weakness implant, Silverwolf's biggest weapon was assuredly her ultimate, shredding a target's defense by 45% for 3 turns. Combine that with the 8% from her talent, and you had a character with effectively a 53% defense break. Silverwolf had, and frankly still has, incredible damage amplification against a single target. She could artificially force a weakness onto them, strip them of their inherent resistance against it, and apply the largest defense reduction a single character can provide in the entire game. She wasn't just strong at debuffing, she was versatile. RNG definitely got in the way of consistency, but people had no issues melting over Team Threat back in the day, and if it meant being allowed to bring your favorite DPS character to a fight without penalty, it was a price many were willing to pay. Silver Wolf dominated both weakness and DPS amplification, as her only real competition at the time was, ironically, herself, the other Bronya. It wouldn't be until Ranmei that supports began to power creep. With so much going for Silver Wolf, how did she bleed out market share over time, and more importantly, so quickly? There are 4 factors playing a role in her downfall, first of which being, well, it was impossible to even get her. Prior to this month, Silver Wolf had only one rerun about half a year after she came out in December of 2023. Throughout the entirety of 2024, she was never seen again. Believe it or not, player attachment plays a huge role in character longevity. Even if they reach a point where they start to get outperformed by other characters, if a player has been using them for a long time, unless the alternative is that much better than them, they'll likely keep using them. But if a character is not accessible, then it's hard for them to withstand the effects of power creep. Silver Wolf may be the biggest victim of that. Anyone who joined the game in version 2 onwards had literally zero opportunity to even get her, let alone try her out and see if she could earn a spot in your favorite characters list. Worse yet, the best and most popular party throughout early version 2 was Akron, whose best budget team was herself, Pela, and Silver Wolf. But those without the super hacker had to instead opt for the triple Nihility Mommy team and make do with that instead. That was the only other option for E0S0 Akron. Version 2.2 featured the advent of Super Break, a mechanic further incentivizing a break-oriented strategy, one that Silver Wolf herself was, in concept, appropriately equipped for. Since break damage cannot be amplified by crit, her defense reduction was one of the few ways to augment that sort of damage, but there was just no opportunity for most players to give it a try. Throughout that time, players got to establish their teams. For example, if hypothetically you had a Super Break team consisting of Firefly, Silver Wolf, Harmony, Trailblazer, and Gallagher, when the chance to pull for Ranmei comes out, though she does outperform Silver Wolf, since you already have someone covering that base, efficiency-wise you'd probably be better off spending your pulls on a field that isn't covered, like maybe working on a follow-up team. However, most people did have Ranmei when constructing their first break team, eliminating the chance of using Silver Wolf entirely. If she came first, she might have been able to preserve a portion of market share by exploiting opportunity costs. But by the time Silver Wolf got another rerun, which is right now, the meta has power crept so far that forget being our first choice, she's not even on the list anymore. Perhaps if she came out again in maybe version 2.3 or 2.4, there would have still been room for players to try her out, but version 3.0 is far too late for her. Silver Wolf got her second rerun towards the tail end of most version 1 units getting shoved out of top tier. Second reason, and probably the most influential one, she got power crept straight up. In the past, we thought her ability to implant any weakness onto enemies would make her a must-have for the meta going forward, since we all assumed this would be a power native only to her. Or at least even if another weakness implant character were to come out, it could potentially just be another support character who was perhaps more focused on AoE while Silver Wolf was better against a single target. Both expectations were thrown out the window. To start, reducing toughness didn't just get easier, it also became more abundant. The first instance of this was Shuei, who came out at 1.6, possessing the ability to reduce enemy toughness regardless of vulnerability. Later, an incredibly strong main attacker in the form of Akron was released, who similarly had the ability to break enemy toughness whether they did or did not have a lightning weakness. More importantly is that she could do it against all targets, not just one. As well, her technique had the same effect where she could lower toughness of all enemies at the start of battle, regardless of weakness type. I should also mention that just before her there was Ranmei, whose technique also guaranteed a vulnerability strike at the start of battle. But back to Akron, what's most telling here is that Silver Wolf didn't just have to contend with the fact that other characters could break toughness regardless of vulnerability, but in addition to that, those characters were DPS units, begging the question if it's worth exhausting a party slot when the main attacker can do it by themselves. The situation exacerbated even more throughout mid-version 2 with the advent of Boonhill and Firefly, break-oriented DPS characters with the ability to implant their respective elemental vulnerabilities to enemies. In the case of Firefly, her technique was Akron's technique on steroids, damaging all enemies at the start of each wave while also applying a fire weakness to them. You didn't even have to waste a turn, a skill point, or an ultimate. Enemies would become vulnerable just like that. The expectation was that break-focused teams would in theory value Silver Wolf's skill, but their main carries ended up doing just fine without her. More characters joined the fray who could fully ignore weakness types like Facial and Rappa, further lessening the need to bring Silver Wolf for that purpose. Finally, Tingyoon's Fugol, while not being able to implant a weakness, could allow her entire party to lower enemy toughness no matter what the element. True, their damage is still lowered by their inherent resistance, but if the goal is to just aim for breaks, it's irrelevant anyway. We got to a point where lowering enemy toughness went from something you had to go out of your way for, to something that either just happens by playing the game normally, or if you do have to play around it, there are many more practical and slot-efficient choices, specifically non-RNG choices, because remember, outside of modern quantum teams, there's no guarantee you got the weakness implant you want. Combining Ranmei and Fugue together results in almost an instantaneous weakness break against any enemy essentially. Now, what about Silver Wolf's defense reduction? Doesn't that still give us a reason to use her? Yes, in the sense that to this day, she still applies the biggest defense break possible by a single character. However, if we're solely evaluating the extent of increasing your party's DPS, the bar for this has elevated to such a towering height that units like Sunday, Robin, Ranmei, Jalcho, Fugue, Remembrance MC, Sparkle, Topaz, and so on provide far more than she can. Silver Wolf's ultimate is indeed strong, but we knew one day, sooner or later, other supports would catch up to that 53% defense break. The hope was that her custom weakness implant would be the difference maker. She might get power creeped in numbers, but she could still hold her own through her skill. Sadly, both aspects of her got power crept. Third reason, recall when I mentioned the issue with hardcoding in that most version 1 units, namely earlier ones, were made without consideration for the eventual creation of combat engines like damage over time, break, follow-ups, summons, and whatnot. Though she is more dynamic than it appears, Silver Wolf unfortunately is still a victim to hard coding in that nothing in her kit allows her to piggyback off the mechanics of any archetype. Everything in her gameplay gave off the suggestion that she would work well in break teams, but she doesn't have anything that explicitly synergizes with that engine. Her skill makes it so you can lower toughness of virtually any element, but she doesn't increase break damage or break efficiency, or even lower toughness all that much herself. It would be one thing if perhaps her ultimate lowered enemy defense and also had the max toughness gauge of her target, but you get what I mean, right? She indirectly works into that kind of playstyle, not directly. But that was because there was no break engine when she came out. Hoyo didn't conceptualize the archetype until nearly a year after Silver Wolf. I mean, the door is always open to, buff older characters, but outside of releasing an evolved version of her like they did for Tingyun, March, and Herta, I don't think they're gonna change her. What about the hypercarry side of things? She makes for an excellent boss killer support for units like Akron or the existing Mono Quantum teams. True, but again, support standards have been raised very high. Silver Wolf has gotten fully eclipsed by Jalcho and Akron teams, and Mono Quantum Sela and Qingque just can't keep up with the metagame. The only way Silver Wolf could have survived the growing strength and capabilities of new units is by latching on to one of the engines, but she couldn't due to Hoyo not having the foresight to account for it, nor the willingness to retroactively buff older characters. Reason 4. The death of single target. Honkai Star Rail is currently in an erudition focused meta. AoE is the name of the game. The endgame landscape has become increasingly more unwelcoming and unforgiving to exclusively single target characters. Those who have been finding success usually do so by cheating, aka attacking outside of their turn like Facial and Topaz, or just being so insanely cracked that they can one-tap anything in the game like Boothill. In regards to the support category, top-tier supports in this day and age, both Harmony and Nihility are AoE focused, capable of buffing the entire team or nerfing the entire enemy team. Silver Wolf can only debuff one target, making her next to unusable in pure fiction. Even Apex Shadow is kinda tough, given you have to clear the side enemies before you get to break the boss, meaning you can't cheat with Silver Wolf to ignore the ads and go straight for the boss. Not only that, but more enemies are being brought in who can lock their toughness gauge until you meet a certain condition, like the aforementioned clearing ads first, defeating the purpose of Silver Wolf applying weaknesses to the main boss to begin with. In essence, Silver Wolf has to contend with endgame content pushing in the opposite direction of what she specializes in, and what few scenarios you can still use her in have mechanics that outright prevent her from doing what she wants to do. Silver Wolf is by no means a bad character, she just got circumstantially screwed in every which way possible. The only reason she's kept in relevance right now is with the help of Akron. Akron, Pela, Silver Wolf, and Sustain is still being used by free-to-plays and budget players to this day. The only other options they have for Nihility that can contest her in that field is Jalcho, which not many people went after, and Fugue with Akron is a very niche thing. All that's to say, Silver Wolf is literally hanging by a thread. She's entirely at the mercy of when HSR decides to release another Nihility character that can take her place. I don't believe there's another character in this game who's as unlucky as her. Everything that could have gone wrong for her did go wrong. She's a very strong character suffering from a case of not being optimal in any situation, thereby destroying any semblance of pull value for her. She still has the potential to be meta, but the game just won't let her. Anyways though, that concludes my video on Silver Wolf. What do you guys think about her situation? Do you think it's over for her, or is there a chance for her to make a comeback? Let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at VarsFarum, join my Discord server, and check out my other What Happened To and Why No One Plays videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.